Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about flexbox layout in 15 minutes. So in between JavaScript topic, I like to do some CSS topics. So today's topic is very important. Now, even Bootstrap is using flexbox layout inside. So it's very important to learn flexbox if you are a CSS guy. So let's check it out. And welcome to Texy Tutorials. Flexbox may look harder to learn in the beginning, but it's actually focused around only few properties, about 5 or 6 of them. And if you learn them thoroughly, you can just learn the entire thing within a day or so. But make sure you need to practice a lot, and it will make your life much easier. So let's start by creating a list. So I'm gonna create a UL, and inside I'm gonna have some li. Let's call it 1, 2, 3, 5, and it renders quite uglily as we expected. Now before we go to flex, let's just fix a few things and then we're gonna apply flex to it, and we're gonna look at lots of other options. So let's first do UL style. So we want to remove this dot, so I can say list style type is none, so it removes all that stuff. And I'm also gonna remove any margin or any padding that it applies by default. So now it's all the way here. Let's add some border. Border is, let's say, 1 pixel, solid. Well, let's have dotted red. Okay, so I have a border. Okay, for all the LIs, which is inside, we can say border is, let's say, 1 pixel, solid, black, and we can add some margins and padding. Margin is, let's say, 0.5 em, and padding is also 0.5 em. All right, so it looks nicely, and by default, this is display block. That's why they are piling up like blocks, and the width is 100%. That's the nature of display block. So now let's start our flexbox layout. So flexbox layout focuses around 2 things. The container. So here our container is UL, which holds all the items, and these are each items. So we have to control everything, pretty much everything, through container. So here we have to add one more property called display, and we're gonna call it flex. Now remember, display property can have display block, inline table. Similarly, you have flex, which tells the UL that all the other item inside this container should behave flex. So this allows you to control that element as a flex layout. So by default, you have things are moving from left to right, and they are in exactly the order they're defined. By default, they are not wrapping. Let's say something like this. As you can see, they are not wrapping, so that's the natural behavior. So direction is left to right, there is no wrap, and they are in order. And also, they are behaving like they are in row. This is the default for flex. So flex, you can have 2 kinds of ways you can display it, either in a column fashion or in row fashion. So by default, it's rows. So first, let's control that. So for changing row to column, we use flex direction. So by right now, it's row. It's not gonna change anything. If I do column, then it behaves like blocks. So let's switch back to row, and now they are rows. What if I want this over here in a reverse order? So 1 would stick on the right side, and then 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So it completely flip the view. For that, I would use reverse, row reverse. And as you can see, it completely flips the view. The 1 is the far left. Similarly, if I do column reverse, it does the same thing. 1 is at the bottom and 5 is at the top. But let's keep it row for now. What if I remove these paddings and margins? Then, as you can see, there is no margin and padding by default. It's all kind of touching each other, all the elements, and by default it's on the left side. Now let's introduce it back so it looks a little nicer. By default, there is no wrap, as we looked at. It just, even if you have more elements than your container, then it would go outside. So it's not wrapping. But you can add a wrapping. So as you would imagine, the name of the property would be flex wrap. So the direction controls the rows and columns. Wrap controls no wrap or wrap. So by default, it's no wrap. This is the default property, but we can add wrap now. So, well, here it won't make much difference because we only have 5 elements. But let's say if I copy paste bunch others, it will start wrapping. Now here, as you notice that it's going 1, 2, 3 and then wrapping at the bottom. If I want the reverse wrapping where instead of wrapping at the bottom, it should go up, I can do wrap reverse. And now it actually starts from the bottom and wraps up. Basically, it creates another row on the top when it wraps. So that's what the wrap reverse does. Okay, let's remove all the other elements so we can see things more clearly. Okay, remember for the row reverse flex direction, the whole view was flipping where one is touching the right side of it instead of left side. And it would start from right to left. What if I want something like this where 5 should be touching here and then 4 and 3 and 2 and 1? So for that, there is a property called justify content. And there are multiple options. So if I do flex start, this is the default, which means start from the left side. If I do end, which means move it to the right side, but it's not flipping. The 1 is still most left side compared to wrap reverse where 1 is actually touching the right side. It's making it right align instead of left align. And if I want it centered, I would simply do center and it exactly in the center. Now this used to be very difficult. You have to use a position absolute and all that stuff. You have to do all kind of tricks. Now with the flex, it's easy as just changing one property. Now what about vertically? So right now if I remove the margin and paddings, it is exactly in the center, horizontally and vertically, but it's an illusion. Vertically, if I, let's say, give the container some height, a fixed height, which you could have. So if I have, let's say, 200 pixels, it's stretching everything, which is a wrong behavior. We don't want this. What we want is the whole thing nicely centered vertically as well. So for that, we need to introduce another property called align items. And here we want it also centered. Now it's actually vertically centered and horizontally centered as well. What if I want them all the way at the bottom? Then I would simply do align items, flex start, which puts it at the bottom, flex end will puts it in the top, and what were we seeing, which is called stretch, which stretches the whole thing. That's the default. But what we want is center. Now let's add the margins back so it looks nicer. There are times where you want them equally distributed, which means the space between should be nicely adjusted so that you don't have to manually put anything. And that's the whole purpose of flex, is that it's so flexible that you're not saying that, okay, move it here 20 pixels or 30 pixels. Just adjust everything as I'm saying. I don't really care about exact margins or exact position. I just want things to be flexible and nice looking. For the justify content, instead of center, I can use something better. So I can say space between. Space between, like Dave Matthews song, it puts all the space between each element equally. So between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, the spaces are equal. If I remove the padding and margins for each li, you can see that 1 is actually touching the left side and 5 is touching the right side. But this still looks a little bit ugly. What if and that is because they're touching on the both sides. And oftentimes you want them somewhere around here. So we need some space on the left and right side. So we have, as you have guessed, space around. And that would add some spaces. But if you look at now, the space around is a little smaller than space between. and it's about half. So this space between 1 and the left side is about half of the space between 1 and 2. Kind of looks nice. And if I introduce again the paddings and margins, now as you can see, it looks really nice. If I adjust it, it's adjusting really nicely. But some people prefer space evenly, which means even on the left side, you want the equal space. So in that case, you can do this. And now everything is even. So the space between left and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, they are all equal. Now what you use is your preference. I prefer space around. Some people might prefer space evenly. So we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties. We can control everything. Okay, so now we haven't done anything with the li, but there are times when you want to do a lot of things with it. Right now, everything that we have is in order. Now, what if I want to flexibly, I want the container 1 to take a certain amount of space than container 2. So when you're building a layout, you might want to do that. And you want it flexible enough to stretch and shrink as you need, and keeping that the ratio. So how do I do that? So the first thing we need to look at is the order. Right now they are in the order that they are defined, but we can change that. So for that, I'm going to introduce some classes. So I'm going to create 2 classes, flex1, and I'm going to say order is 1. So right now, none of these have orders. So let's start with adding class equal to flex1. So now 1 has an order. And suddenly 1 goes all the way on the right side. And that is because the things between order and unordered goes on the left, order items go on the right. So if you want to order things, you want to add order to every element. Then it only makes sense. So let's do that. And I'm going to add some style here so that we can see things betterly. I'm going to say border, let's say 3 pixel, dotted, let's say red. Okay, so 1 is here. As soon as I introduce class flex1 to 2, it would move here. So if 2 things have the same order, then they would order in the order they are defined. So 1 is defined first and 2 is defined second. So that's how they're going to behave. So now let's add class flex1 to every element. So there's no difference right now, except to see the difference, we need to change the order. So I'm going to introduce another class called flex2. So this would have different order 2. It's almost like a priority. Order 1, you have a priority 1, so it's gonna stay on the far left, and order 2 follows it. So imagine if I change 1 to order 2. Now 1 goes all the way to life because everyone else has order 1, which means they're gonna come first. So let's add some border here, 3 pixel dotted blue. I'm also going to add some flex2 here. So now 1 and 3 are order 2 and everybody else is order 1. So this is how you can order things non-linearly, which was very hard to do before. You can imagine using float left and float right. This would be almost impossible. What about the size? Right now they all are exactly the same size, but I want to change that. I want, let's say, flex1 to have different size. So for that, there's a new property called flex basis. And basis means initial size. I can give it a percentage. Let's say give it a 25%. So all the elements with flex1, which is 2, 4, and 5, has 25% initial. This is quite tricky. Because things are flexible, it will adjust itself because I have margins and paddings and the border is actually 3 pixels. So that adds all the, but what it's saying right now is that I want to start with 25 of the total width, and then it shrinks and grows accordingly. So right now I have a wrap, but if I do, let's say, no wrap by removing the flex wrap, then it would stay in one line, grow and shrink accordingly. Initial width would be 25%. Now what if I do 100%? It will still adjust because you can't really do 3 elements 100%, right? So that's what's happening. So instead of using percentages basis, you can do something else. There is a thing called shrink and grow, where you can say, okay, I want to start with 20 EM, and then I want to give it a stretch and shrink ratio. So let's say I can say 20 EM. So this is how I want to start for each flex one, which is 2, 4, and 5. Or I can do, let's say 10 EM. And then I want to define, right now it will be starting with 10 and it would stay there after that. So it would stay 10. Now what I want to do is I want to say I want to stretch. Once it reaches that, if I stretch my screen, I want it to grow, but at a specific pace. So I can provide two arguments. First is growth, and second is stretch. And this is the speed at which it should grow. Now let's add also the same thing to Flex 2. I can say, okay, I want it to grow and shrink double. Instead of Flex Basics, I have to call it Flex, because this holds 3: stretch, shrink, and Flex Basis. So right now they all have the same basis, which means it will have all 10 EM to begin with. And as I shrink, Flex 2 would shrink faster because I'm saying shrink twice. That's why, as you can see, it's shrinking faster, and it would also grow faster. So if it grows, it will grow faster than 1. So let's say if I have, instead of 10, if I have 5 each, as you can see, it's growing faster as well, because 1 and 3 grows twice and it shrinks twice as well. So now 1 and 3 is smaller when it shrinks. So 5 EM is the initial size, and you can define growth and shrink rate here. And you can have different grow and shrink. And you can see how it will help you in a responsive layouts, where it could shrink and grow as you like. And you can control now all of this using about 6 or 7 properties. But remember, if you want to master Flex, you have to practice. You have to use a real application, practice, and then only you will learn how to use. And again, I have a whole array of CSS topics that I've covered so far. So if you want to check them out, I'll provide a link here in the corner to the playlist so you can check out. I also have interview questions and all sorts of CSS videos. And I hope you learned something from this video. And if you did, please like. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and provide a nice comment. And you can help me translate this video to your native language. It's pretty easy, and I'll provide the instruction and the details. And thank you.